Chapter 6. D'Artagnan in his 40th year. Years have elapsed. Many events have happened, alas. Since, in our romance of the Three Musketeers, we took leave of D'Artagnan at No. 12 Rue des Fossoyeurs. D'Artagnan had not failed in his career, but circumstances had been adverse to him. So long as he was surrounded by his friends, he retained his youth and the poetry of his character. He was one of those fine, ingenuous natures which assimilate themselves easily to the dispositions of others. Athos imparted to him his greatness of soul, Porthos his enthusiasm, Aramis his elegance. Had D'Artagnan continued his intimacy with these three men, he would have become a superior character. Athos was the first to leave him, in order that he might retire to a little property he had inherited near Blois. Porthos, the second, to marry an attorney's wife. And lastly, Aramis, the third, to take orders and become an abbé. From that day, D'Artagnan felt lonely and powerless, without courage to pursue a career in which he could only distinguish himself on condition that each of his three companions should endow him with one of the gifts each had received from heaven. Notwithstanding his commission in the Musketeers, D'Artagnan felt completely solitary. For a time, the delightful remembrance of Madame Bonancieux left on his character a certain poetic tinge, perishable indeed. For like all other recollections in this world, these impressions were, by degrees, effaced. A garrison life is fatal even to the most aristocratic organization, and imperceptibly, D'Artagnan, always in the camp, always on horseback, always in garrison, became, I know not how in the present age one would express it, a typical trooper. His early refinement of character was not only not lost, it grew even greater than ever. But it was now applied to the little instead of to the great things of life, to the martial condition of the soldier, comprised under the head of a good lodging, a rich table, a congenial hostess. These important advantages D'Artagnan found to his own taste in the Rue Tiquetonne at the sign of the Roe. From the time D'Artagnan took quarters in that hotel, the mistress of the house, a pretty and fresh-looking Flemish woman, 25 or 26 years old, had been singularly interested in him. And after certain love passages, much obstructed by an inconvenient husband to whom a dozen times D'Artagnan had made a pretense of passing a sword through his body, that husband had disappeared one fine morning, after furtively selling certain choice lots of wine, carrying away with him money and jewels. He was thought to be dead. His wife, especially, who cherished the pleasing idea that she was a widow, stoutly maintained that death had taken him. Therefore, after the connection had continued 3 years, carefully fostered by D'Artagnan, who found his bed and his mistress more agreeable every year, each doing credit to the other, the mistress conceived the extraordinary desire of becoming a wife and proposed to D'Artagnan that he should marry her. "Ah, fie," D'Artagnan replied. "Bigamy, my dear. Come now, you don't really wish it. But he is dead, I am sure of it. He was a very contrary fellow and might come back on purpose to have us hanged. All right, if he comes back you will kill him, you are so skillful and so brave. Peste, my darling. Another way of getting hanged. So you refuse my request. To be sure I do, furiously." The pretty landlady was desolate. She would have taken D'Artagnan not only as her husband, but as her god. He was so handsome and had so fierce a mustache. Then, along toward the 4th year, came the expedition of Franche-Comté. D'Artagnan was assigned to it, and made his preparations to depart. There were then great griefs, tears without end and solemn promises to remain faithful, all of course on the part of the hostess. D'Artagnan was too grand to promise anything. He purposed only to do all that he could to increase the glory of his name. As to that, we know D'Artagnan's courage. He exposed himself freely to danger, and while charging at the head of his company, he received a ball through the chest which laid him prostrate on the field of battle. He had been seen falling from his horse and had not been seen to rise. Everyone, therefore, believed him to be dead, especially those to whom his death would give promotion. One believes readily what he wishes to believe. Now in the army, from the division generals who desire the death of the general-in-chief, to the soldiers who desire the death of the corporals, all desire someone's death. But D'Artagnan was not a man to let himself be killed like that. After he had remained through the heat of the day unconscious on the battlefield, the cool freshness of the night brought him to himself. He gained a village, knocked at the door of the finest house, and was received as the wounded are always and everywhere received in France. He was petted, tended, cured, and one fine morning, in better health than ever before, he set out for France. Once in France, he turned his course toward Paris, and reaching Paris went straight to Rue Tiquetonne. But D'Artagnan found in his chamber the personal equipment of a man, complete, except for the sword, arranged along the wall. "He has returned," said he. "So much the worse, and so much the better." It need not be said that D'Artagnan was still thinking of the husband. He made inquiries, and discovered that the servants were new, and that the mistress had gone for a walk. "Alone?" asked D'Artagnan. "With Monsieur. Monsieur has returned then." "Of course," naively replied the servant. "If I had any money," said D'Artagnan to himself, "I would go away, but I have none. I must stay and follow the advice of my hostess, while thwarting the conjugal designs of this inopportune apparition." He had just completed this monologue, which proves that in momentous circumstances nothing is more natural than the monologue, when the servant-maid, watching at the door, suddenly cried out, "Ah! See, here is Madame returning with Monsieur." D'Artagnan looked out, and at the corner of Rue Montmartre saw the hostess coming along hanging to the arm of an enormous Swiss, who tiptoed in his walk with a magnificent air, which pleasantly reminded him of his old friend Porthos. "Is that Monsieur?" said D'Artagnan to himself. Oh. He has grown a good deal, it seems to me." And he sat down in the hall, choosing a conspicuous place. The hostess, as she entered, saw D'Artagnan and uttered a little cry, whereupon D'Artagnan, judging that he had been recognized, rose, ran to her and embraced her tenderly. The Swiss, with an air of stupefaction, looked at the hostess, who turned pale. "Ah, it is you, Monsieur." "What do you want of me?" she asked in great distress. "Is Monsieur your cousin?" "Is Monsieur your brother?" said D'Artagnan, not in the slightest degree embarrassed in the role he was playing. And without waiting for her reply, he threw himself into the arms of the Helvetian, who received him with great coldness. "Who is that man?" he asked. The hostess replied only by gasps. "Who is that Swiss?" asked D'Artagnan. "Monsieur is going to marry me," replied the hostess, between two gasps. "Your husband, then, is at last dead. How does that concern you?" replied the Swiss. "It concerns me much," said D'Artagnan, "since you cannot marry Madame without my consent, and since—" "And since?" asked the Swiss. "And since I do not give it," said the Musketeer. The Swiss became as purple as a peony. He wore his elegant uniform. D'Artagnan was wrapped in a sort of gray cloak. The Swiss was 6 feet high. D'Artagnan was hardly more than 5. The Swiss considered himself on his own ground and regarded D'Artagnan as an intruder. "Will you go away from here?" demanded the Swiss, stamping violently, like a man who begins to be seriously angry. "I, by no means," said D'Artagnan. "Someone must go for help," said a lad, who could not comprehend that this little man should make a stand against that other man, who was so large. D'Artagnan, with a sudden accession of wrath, seized the lad by the ear and led him apart, with the injunction, "Stay you where you are and don't you stir, or I will pull this ear off. As for you, illustrious descendant of William Tell, you will straightway get together your clothes which are in my room and which annoy me, and go out quickly to another lodging." The Swiss began to laugh boisterously. "I go out," he said. "And why?" "Ah, very well," said D'Artagnan. "I see that you understand French. Come then and take a turn with me, and I will explain." The hostess, who knew D'Artagnan's skill with the sword, began to weep and tear her hair. D'Artagnan turned toward her, saying, "Then send him away, madame." "Pooh," said the Swiss, who had needed a little time to take in D'Artagnan's proposal. "Pooh. Who are you, in the first place, to ask me to take a turn with you?" "I am lieutenant in His Majesty's Musketeers," said D'Artagnan, "and consequently your superior in everything. Only, as the question now is not of rank, but of quarters, you know the custom, come and seek for yours. The first to return will recover his chamber." D'Artagnan led away the Swiss in spite of lamentations on the part of the hostess, who in reality found her heart inclining toward her former lover, though she would not have been sorry to give a lesson to that haughty musketeer who had affronted her by the refusal of her hand. It was night when the two adversaries reached the field of battle. D'Artagnan politely begged the Swiss to yield to him the disputed chamber. The Swiss refused by shaking his head and drew his sword. "Then you will lie here," said D'Artagnan. "It is a wretched bed, but that is not my fault, and it is you who have chosen it." With these words, he drew in his turn and crossed swords with his adversary. He had to contend against a strong wrist, but his agility was superior to all force. The Swiss received 2 wounds and was not aware of it, by reason of the cold. But suddenly feebleness, occasioned by loss of blood, obliged him to sit down. "There," said D'Artagnan, "what did I tell you? Fortunately, you won't be laid up more than a fortnight. Remain here, and I will send you your clothes by the boy. Goodbye. Oh, by the way, you'd better take lodging in the Rue Montorgueil at the Chat Qui Pelote. You will be well fed there, if the hostess remains the same. Adieu." Thereupon he returned in a lively mood to his room, and sent to the Swiss the things that belonged to him. The boy found him sitting where D'Artagnan had left him, still overwhelmed by the coolness of his adversary. The boy, the hostess, and all the house had the same regard for D'Artagnan that one would have for Hercules should he return to earth to repeat his 12 labors. But when he was alone with the hostess, he said, "Now, pretty Madeleine, you know the difference between a Swiss and a gentleman. As for you, you have acted like a barmaid. So much the worse for you, for by such conduct you have lost my esteem and my patronage. I have driven away the Swiss to humiliate you, but I shall lodge here no longer. I will not sleep where I must scorn. Ho there, boy. Have my valise carried to the Muid de Moor, Rue des Bourdonnais. Adieu, madame." In saying these words, D'Artagnan appeared at the same time majestic and grieved. The hostess threw herself at his feet, asked his pardon, and held him back with a sweet violence. What more need be said? The spit turned, the stove roared, the pretty Madeleine wept. D'Artagnan felt himself invaded by hunger, cold, and love. He pardoned, and having pardoned, he remained. And this explains how D'Artagnan had quarters in the Rue Tiquetonne, at the Hôtel de la Chevrette. D'Artagnan then returned home in thoughtful mood, finding a somewhat lively pleasure in carrying Mazarin's bag of money and thinking of that fine diamond, which he had once called his own, and which he had seen on the minister's finger that night. Should that diamond ever fall into my hands again, he reflected, I would turn it at once into money. I would buy with the proceeds certain lands around my father's shadow, which is a pretty place, well enough, but with no land to it at all, except a garden about the size of the cemetery des Innocents. And I should wait in all my glory till some rich heiress, attracted by my good looks, rode along to marry me. Then I should like to have 3 sons. I should make the first a nobleman like Athos, the second a good soldier like Porthos, the third an excellent abbé like Aramis. Faith, that would be a far better life than I lead now. But Monsieur Mazarin is a mean wretch who won't dispossess himself of his diamond in my favor. On entering the Rue Tiquetonne, he heard a tremendous noise and found a dense crowd near the house. "Oh ho," said he, "is the hotel on fire?" On approaching the hotel of the row he found, however, that it was in front of the next house the mob was collected. The people were shouting and running about with torches. By the light of one of these torches, D'Artagnan perceived men in uniform. He asked what was going on. He was told that 20 citizens, headed by one man, had attacked a carriage which was escorted by a troop of the cardinal's bodyguard. But a reinforcement having come up, the assailants had been put to flight, and the leader had taken refuge in the hotel next to his lodgings. The house was now being searched. In his youth, D'Artagnan had often headed the bourgeoisie against the military, but he was cured of all those hot-headed propensities. Besides, he had the cardinal's 100 pistoles in his pocket, so he went into the hotel without a word. There he found Madeleine alarmed for his safety and anxious to tell him all the events of the evening, but he cut her short by ordering her to put his supper in his room and give him with it a bottle of good Burgundy. He took his key and candle and went upstairs to his bedroom. He had been contented, for the convenience of the house, to lodge in the 4th story, and truth obliges us even to confess that his chamber was just above the gutter and below the roof. His first care on entering it was to lock up in an old bureau with a new lock his bag of money, and then as soon as supper was ready he sent away the waiter who brought it up and sat down to table. Not to reflect on what had passed, as one might fancy. No, D'Artagnan considered that things are never well done when they are not reserved to their proper time. He was hungry, he supped, he went to bed. Neither was he one of those who think that the necessary silence of the night brings counsel with it. In the night he slept, but in the morning, refreshed and calm, he was inspired with his clearest views of everything. It was long since he had any reason for his morning's inspiration, but he always slept all night long. At daybreak he awoke and took a turn around his room. "In 43, he said, just before the death of the late cardinal, I received a letter from Athos. Where was I then? Let me see. Though, at the siege of Besançon, I was in the trenches. He told me, let me think, what was it? That he was living on a small estate, but where? I was just reading the name of the place when the wind blew my letter away. I suppose to the Spaniards. There's no use in thinking any more about Athos. Let me see. With regard to Porthos, I received a letter from him, too. He invited me to a hunting party on his property in the month of September, 1646. Unluckily, as I was then in Béarn, on account of my father's death, the letter followed me there. I had left Béarn when it arrived, and I never received it until the month of April, 1647. And as the invitation was for September, 1646, I couldn't accept it. Let me look for this letter. It must be with my title deeds. D'Artagnan opened an old casket which stood in a corner of the room, and which was full of parchments referring to an estate during a period of 200 years lost to his family. He uttered an exclamation of delight, for the large handwriting of Porthos was discernible, and underneath some lines traced by his worthy spouse. D'Artagnan eagerly searched for the heading of this letter. It was dated from the Château du Vallon. Porthos had forgotten that any other address was necessary. In his pride, he fancied that everyone must know the Château du Vallon. "Devil take the vain fellow," said D'Artagnan. "However, I had better find him out first, since he can't want money." Athos must have become an idiot by this time from drinking. Aramis must have worn himself to a shadow of his former self by constant genuflection. He cast his eyes again on the letter. There was a postscript. "I write by the same courier to our worthy friend Aramis in his convent." In his convent. What convent? There are about 200 in Paris and 3,000 in France. And then, perhaps, on entering the convent he changed his name. Ah. If I were but learned in theology, I should recollect what it was he used to dispute about with the curate of Montdidier and the superior of the Jesuits, when we were at Crèvecoeur. I should know what doctrine he leans to, and I should glean from that what saint he has adopted as his patron. Well, suppose I go back to the cardinal and ask him for a passport into all the convents one can find, even into the nunneries. It would be a curious idea, and maybe I should find my friend under the name of Achilles. But no. I should lose myself in the cardinal's opinion. Great people only thank you for doing the impossible. What's possible, they say, they can affect themselves, and they are right. But let us wait a little and reflect. I received a letter from him, the dear fellow, in which he even asked me for some small service, which, in fact, I rendered him. Yes, but now what did I do with that letter? D'Artagnan thought a moment, and then went to the wardrobe in which hung his old clothes. He looked for his doublet of the year 1648, and as he had orderly habits, he found it hanging on its nail. He felt in the pocket and drew from it a paper. It was the letter of Aramis. "Monsieur d'Artagnan, you know that I have had a quarrel with a certain gentleman who has given me an appointment for this evening in the Place Royale. As I am of the church, and the affair might injure me if I should share it with any other than a sure friend like you, I write to beg that you will serve me as second. You will enter by the Rue Neuve Sainte Catherine. Under the second lamp on the right you will find your adversary. I shall be with mine under the third. Wholly yours, Aramis." D'Artagnan tried to recall his remembrances. He had gone to the rendezvous, had encountered there the adversary indicated, whose name he had never known, had given him a pretty sword stroke on the arm, then had gone toward Aramis, who at the same time came to meet him, having already finished his affair. "It is over," Aramis had said. "I think I have killed the insolent fellow. But, dear friend, if you ever need me, you know that I am entirely devoted to you." Thereupon Aramis had given him a clasp of the hand and had disappeared under the arcades. So then, he no more knew where Aramis was than where Athos and Porthos were, and the affair was becoming a matter of great perplexity, when he fancied he heard a pane of glass break in his room window. He thought directly of his bag, and rushed from the inner room where he was sleeping. He was not mistaken. As he entered his bedroom, a man was getting in by the window. "Ah, you scoundrel!" cried D'Artagnan, taking the man for a thief and seizing his sword. "Sir," cried the man, "in the name of heaven put your sword back into the sheath and don't kill me unheard. I'm no thief, but an honest citizen, well off in the world with a house of my own. My name is, but surely you are Monsieur d'Artagnan, "And thou, Planchet," cried the lieutenant. "At your service, sir," said Planchet, overwhelmed with joy. "If I were still capable of serving you." "Perhaps so," replied D'Artagnan. "But why the devil dost thou run about the tops of houses at 7 o'clock of the morning in the month of January?" "Sir," said Planchet, "you must know, but perhaps you ought not to know." "Tell us what," returned D'Artagnan, "but first put a napkin against the window and draw the curtains." "Sir," said the prudent Planchet, "in the first place, are you on good terms with Monsieur de Rochefort?" "Perfectly, one of my dearest friends." "Ah, so much the better. But what has de Rochefort to do with this manner you have of invading my room?" "Ah, sir, I must first tell you that Monsieur de Rochefort is—" Planchet hesitated. "Egad, I know where he is," said D'Artagnan. "He's in the Bastille. That is to say, he was there," replied Planchet. "But in returning thither last night, when fortunately you did not accompany him, as his carriage was crossing the Rue de la Ferronnerie, his guards insulted the people, who began to abuse them. The prisoner thought this a good opportunity for escape. He called out his name and cried for help. I was there. I heard the name of Rochefort. I remembered him well. I said in a loud voice that he was a prisoner, a friend of the Duc de Beaufort, who called for help. The people were infuriated. They stopped the horses and cut the escort to pieces, whilst I opened the doors of the carriage and Monsieur de Rochefort jumped out and soon was lost amongst the crowd. At this moment a patrol passed by. I was obliged to sound a retreat toward the Rue Tiquetonne. I was pursued and took refuge in the house next to this, where I have been concealed between two mattresses. This morning I ventured to run along the gutters and— "Well," interrupted D'Artagnan, "I am delighted that de Rochefort is free, but as for thee, if thou shouldst fall into the hands of the king's servants, they will hang thee without mercy. Nevertheless, I promise thee thou shalt be hidden here, though I risk by concealing thee neither more nor less than my lieutenancy, if it was found out that I gave one rebel an asylum." "Ah!" "Sir, you know well I would risk my life for you. Thou mayst add that thou hast risked it, Planchet. I have not forgotten all I owe thee. Sit down there and eat in security. I see thee cast expressive glances at the remains of my supper. Yes, sir, for all I've had since yesterday was a slice of bread and butter, with preserves on it. Although I don't despise sweet things in proper time and place, I found the supper rather light." "Poor fellow," said D'Artagnan. "Well, come, set to." "Ah, sir, you are going to save my life a second time," cried Planchet. And he seated himself at the table, and ate as he did in the merry days of the Rue des Fossoyeurs, whilst D'Artagnan walked to and fro, and thought how he could make use of Planchet under present circumstances. While he turned this over in his mind, Planchet did his best to make up for lost time at table. At last he uttered a sigh of satisfaction and paused, as if he had partially appeased his hunger. "Come," said D'Artagnan, who thought that it was now a convenient time to begin his interrogations. "Dost thou know where Athos is?" "No, sir," replied Planchet. "The devil thou dost not." "Dost know where Porthos is?" "No, not at all." "And Aramis?" "Not in the least." "The devil." "The devil." "The devil. But, sir," said Planchet with a look of shrewdness, "I know where Bazin is." "Where is he?" "At Notre Dame." "What has he to do at Notre Dame?" "He is beadle." "Bazin beadle at Notre Dame." "He must know where his master is." "Without a doubt he must." D'Artagnan thought for a moment, then took his sword and put on his cloak to go out. "Sir," said Planchet in a mournful tone, "do you abandon me thus to my fate? Think, if I am found out here, the people of the house, who have not seen me enter it, will take me for a thief." "True," said D'Artagnan. "Let's see. Canst thou speak any patois? I can do something better than that, sir. I can speak Flemish. Where the devil didst thou learn it? In Artois, where I fought for years. Listen, sir. Goden morgen, mynheer, eth ben begire la wheaten the G sund heats omstand. Which means, good day, sir. I am anxious to know the state of your health. He calls that a language. But never mind, that will do capitally. D'Artagnan opened the door and called out to a waiter to desire Madeleine to come upstairs. When the landlady made her appearance, she expressed much astonishment at seeing Planchet. "My dear landlady," said D'Artagnan, "I beg to introduce to you your brother, who is arrived from Flanders and whom I am going to take into my service." "My brother? Wish your sister good morning, Master Peter." "Welcome, suster," said Planchet. "Goeden day, broder," replied the astonished landlady. "This is the case," said D'Artagnan. "This is your brother, Madeleine. You don't know him perhaps, but I know him. He has arrived from Amsterdam. You must dress him up during my absence. When I return, which will be in about an hour, you must offer him to me as a servant, and upon your recommendation, though he doesn't speak a word of French, I take him into my service. You understand? That is to say, I guess your wishes, and that is all that's necessary," said Madeleine. "You are a precious creature, my pretty hostess, and I am much obliged to you." The next moment D'Artagnan was on his way to Notre Dame. Chapter 7. Touches upon the strange, effects a half-pistole may have. D'Artagnan, as he crossed the Pont Neuf, congratulated himself on having found Planchet again, for at that time an intelligent servant was essential to him. Nor was he sorry that through Planchet and the situation which he held in Rue des Lombards, a connection with the bourgeoisie might be commenced, at that critical period when that class were preparing to make war with the court party. It was like having a spy in the enemy's camp. In this frame of mind, grateful for the accidental meeting with Planchet, pleased with himself, D'Artagnan reached Notre Dame. He ran up the steps, entered the church, and addressing a verger who was sweeping the chapel, asked him if he knew Monsieur Bazin. "Monsieur Bazin, the beadle," said the verger. "Yes. There he is, attending Mass in the chapel of the Virgin." D'Artagnan nearly jumped for joy. He had despaired of finding Bazin, but now, he thought, since he held one end of the thread, he would be pretty sure to reach the other end. He knelt down just opposite the chapel in order not to lose sight of his man. And as he had almost forgotten his prayers and had omitted to take a book with him, he made use of his time in gazing at Bazin. Bazin wore his dress, it may be observed, with equal dignity and saintly propriety. It was not difficult to understand that he had gained the crown of his ambition, and that the silver-mounted wand he brandished was in his eyes as honorable a distinction as the marshal's baton which Condé threw, or did not throw, into the enemy's line of battle at Fribourg. His person had undergone a change, analogous to the change in his dress. His figure had grown rotund and, as it were, canonical. The striking points of his face were effaced. He had still a nose, but his cheeks, fattened out, each took a portion of it unto themselves. His chin had joined his throat. His eyes were swelled up with the puffiness of his cheeks. His hair, cut straight in holy guise, covered his forehead as far as his eyebrows. The officiating priest was just finishing Mass, whilst D'Artagnan was looking at Bazin. He pronounced the words of the Holy Sacrament and retired, giving the benediction, which was received by the kneeling communicants, to the astonishment of D'Artagnan, who recognized in the priest the coadjutor himself, the famous Jean-François Gondy, who at that time, having a presentiment of the part he was to play, was beginning to court popularity by almsgiving. It was to this end that he performed from time to time some of those early masses which the common people, generally, alone attended. A sacerdotal officer. D'Artagnan knelt as well as the rest, received his share of the benediction and made the sign of the cross. But when Bazin passed in his turn, with his eyes raised to heaven and walking, in all humility, the very last, D'Artagnan pulled him by the hem of his robe. Bazin looked down and started, as if he had seen a serpent. "Monsieur d'Artagnan," he cried, "vade retro Satanas." "So, my dear Bazin," said the officer, laughing, "this is the way you receive an old friend." "Sir," replied Bazin, "the true friends of a Christian are those who aid him in working out his salvation, not those who hinder him in doing so." "I don't understand you, Bazin, nor can I see how I can be a stumbling block in the way of your salvation," said D'Artagnan. "You forget, sir, that you very nearly ruined forever that of my master, and that it was owing to you that he was very nearly being damned eternally for remaining a musketeer, whilst all the time his true vocation was the church." "My dear Bazin, you ought to perceive," said D'Artagnan, "from the place in which you find me, that I am greatly changed in everything. Age produces good sense, and as I doubt not but that your master is on the road to salvation, I want you to tell me where he is, that he may help me to mine. Rather say, to take him back with you into the world. Fortunately, I don't know where he is." "How?" cried D'Artagnan. "You don't know where Aramis is?" "Formerly," replied Bazin, "Aramis was his name of perdition. By Aramis is meant Samara, which is the name of a demon. Happily for him, he has ceased to bear that name. And therefore," said D'Artagnan, resolved to be patient to the end, "it is not Aramis I seek, but the Abbé de Herblay. Come, my dear Bazin, tell me where he is." "Didn't you hear me tell you, Monsieur d'Artagnan, that I don't know where he is?" "Yes, certainly, but to that I answer that it is impossible." "It is, nevertheless, the truth, monsieur, the pure truth, the truth of the good God." D'Artagnan saw clearly that he would get nothing out of this man, who was evidently telling a falsehood in his pretended ignorance of the abode of Aramis, but whose lies were bold and decided. "Well, Bazin," said D'Artagnan, "since you do not know where your master lives, let us speak of it no more. Let us part good friends. Accept this half-pistole to drink to my health." "I do not drink." Bazin pushed away with dignity the officer's hand. "'Tis good only for the laity." "Incorruptible," murmured D'Artagnan. "I am unlucky." And whilst he was lost in thought, Bazin retreated toward the sacristy, and even there he could not think himself safe until he had shut and locked the door behind him. D'Artagnan was still in deep thought when someone touched him on the shoulder. He turned and was about to utter an exclamation of surprise when the other made to him a sign of silence. "You hear Rochefort," he said in a low voice. "Hush," returned Rochefort. "Did you know that I am at liberty? I knew it from the fountainhead, from Planchet." "And what brought you here?" "I came to thank God for my happy deliverance," said Rochefort. "And nothing more." "I suppose that is not all. To take my orders from the coadjutor and to see if we cannot wake up Mazarin a little. A bad plan. You'll be shut up again in the Bastille. Oh, as to that, I shall take care, I assure you. The air, the fresh, free air is so good. Besides," and Rochefort drew a deep breath as he spoke, "I am going into the country to make a tour." "Stop," cried D'Artagnan, "I too am going. And if I may without impertinence ask, where are you going?" "To seek my friends." "What friends?" "Those that you asked about yesterday. Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, you are looking for them?" "Yes, on honor." "What then is there surprising in that?" "Nothing." "Queer, though. And in whose behalf are you looking for them?" "You are in no doubt on that score." "That is true. Unfortunately, I have no idea where they are, and you have no way to get news of them." "Wait a week, and I myself will give you some." "A week is too long." I must find them within 3 days. 3 days are a short time, and France is large. No matter, you know the word must. With that word great things are done. And when do you set out? I am now on my road. Good luck to you, and to you a good journey. Perhaps we shall meet on our road. That is not probable. Who knows? Chance is so capricious. Adieu, till we meet again. Apropos, should Mazarin speak to you about me, tell him that I should have requested you to acquaint him that in a short time he will see whether I am, as he says, too old for action. And Rochefort went away with one of those diabolical smiles which used formerly to make D'Artagnan shudder. But D'Artagnan could now see it without alarm, and smiling in his turn, with an expression of melancholy which the recollections called up by that smile could, perhaps, alone give to his countenance, he said, "Go, demon, do what thou wilt. It matters little now to me. There's no second Constance in the world." On his return to the cathedral, D'Artagnan saw Bazin, who was conversing with the sacristan. Bazin was making, with his spare little short arms, ridiculous gestures. D'Artagnan perceived that he was enforcing prudence with respect to himself. D'Artagnan slipped out of the cathedral and placed himself in ambuscade at the corner of the Rue des Canettes. It was impossible that Bazin should go out of the cathedral without his seeing him. In 5 minutes Bazin made his appearance, looking in every direction to see if he were observed, but he saw no one. Calmed by appearances, he ventured to walk on through the Rue Notre Dame. Then D'Artagnan rushed out of his hiding-place and arrived in time to see Bazin turn down the Rue de la Juiverie and enter, in the Rue de la Calendar, a respectable-looking house. And this D'Artagnan felt no doubt was the habitation of the worthy beadle. Afraid of making any inquiries at this house, D'Artagnan entered a small tavern at the corner of the street and asked for a cup of hypocras. This beverage required a good half-hour to prepare, and D'Artagnan had time, therefore, to watch Bazin unsuspected. He perceived in the tavern a pert boy between 12 and 15 years of age, whom he fancied he had seen not 20 minutes before under the guise of a chorister. He questioned him, and as the boy had no interest in deceiving, D'Artagnan learned that he exercised, from 6 o'clock in the morning until 9, the office of chorister, and from 9 o'clock till midnight that of a waiter in the tavern. Whilst he was talking to this lad, a horse was brought to the door of Bazin's house. It was saddled and bridled. Almost immediately Bazin came downstairs. "Look," said the boy, "there's our beadle who is going a journey." "And where is he going?" asked D'Artagnan. "Forsooth, I don't know. Half a pistole if you can find out," said D'Artagnan. "For me," cried the boy, his eyes sparkling with joy, "if I can find out where Bazin is going." "That is not difficult." "You are not joking, are you?" "No, on the honor of an officer, there is the half-pistole." And he showed him the seductive coin, but did not give it him. "I shall ask him. Just the very way not to know." "Wait till he is set out and then marry. Come up, ask, and find out." The half-pistole is ready, and he put it back again into his pocket. "I understand," said the child, with that jeering smile which marks especially the gamin de Paris. "Well, we must wait." They had not long to wait. 5 minutes afterward, Bazin set off on a full trot, urging on his horse by the blows of a parapluie, which he was in the habit of using instead of a riding whip. Scarcely had he turned the corner of the Rue de la Juiverie, when the boy rushed after him like a bloodhound on full scent. Before 10 minutes had elapsed the child returned. "Well," said D'Artagnan. "Well," answered the boy, "the thing is done. Where is he gone? The half-pistole is for me. Doubtless answer me. I want to see it. Give it me, that I may see it is not false. There it is. The child put the piece of money into his pocket. "And now, where is he gone?" inquired D'Artagnan. "He is gone to Noisy. How dost thou know?" "Ah, faith, there was no great cunning necessary. I knew the horse he rode. It belonged to the butcher, who lets it out now and then to M. Bazin. Now, I thought that the butcher would not let his horse out like that, without knowing where it was going." And he answered that Monsieur Bazin went to Noisy. "'Tis his custom. He goes 2 or 3 times a week. Dost thou know Noisy well?" "I think so, truly, my nurse lives there." "Is there a convent at Noisy?" "Isn't there a great and grand one, the convent of Jesuits?" "What is thy name?" "Friquet." D'Artagnan wrote the child's name in his tablets. "Please, sir," said the boy, "do you think I can gain any more half-pistoles in any way?" "Perhaps," replied D'Artagnan. And having got out all he wanted, he paid for the hypocras, which he did not drink, and went quickly back to the Rue Tiquetonne. Chapter 8. D'Artagnan, going to a distance to discover Aramis. On entering the Hotel D'Artagnan, saw a man sitting in a corner by the fire. It was Planchet, but so completely transformed, thanks to the old clothes that the departing husband had left behind, that D'Artagnan himself could hardly recognize him. Madeleine introduced him, in presence of all the servants. Planchet addressed the officer with a fine Flemish phrase. The officer replied in words that belonged to no language at all, and the bargain was concluded. Madeleine's brother entered D'Artagnan's service. The plan adopted by D'Artagnan was soon perfected. He resolved not to reach Noisy in the day, for fear of being recognized. He had therefore plenty of time before him, for Noisy is only 3 or 4 leagues from Paris, on the road to Meaux. He began his day by breakfasting substantially, a bad beginning when one wants to employ the head, but an excellent precaution when one wants to work the body. And about 2 o'clock he had his 2 horses saddled, and followed by Planchet, he quitted Paris by the Barrière de la Villette. A most active search was still prosecuted in the house near the Hôtel de la Chevrette for the discovery of Planchet. At about 1.5 leagues from the city, D'Artagnan, finding that in his impatience he had set out too soon, stopped to give the horses breathing time. The inn was full of disreputable-looking people, who seemed as if they were on the point of commencing some nightly expedition. A man, wrapped in a cloak, appeared at the door, but seeing a stranger he beckoned to his companions, and 2 men who were drinking in the inn went out to speak to him. D'Artagnan, on his side, went up to the landlady, praised her wine, which was a horrible production from the country of Montreuil, and heard from her that there were only 2 houses of importance in the village. One of these belonged to the Archbishop of Paris, and was at that time the abode of his niece, the Duchess of Longueville. The other was a convent of Jesuits and was the property, a by no means unusual circumstance, of these worthy fathers. At 4 o'clock, D'Artagnan recommenced his journey. He proceeded slowly and in deep reverie. Planchet also was lost in thought, but the subject of their reflections was not the same. One word which their landlady had pronounced had given a particular turn to D'Artagnan's deliberations. This was the name of Madame de Longueville. That name was indeed one to inspire imagination and produce thought. Madame de Longueville was one of the highest ladies in the realm. She was also one of the greatest beauties at court. She had formerly been suspected of an intimacy of too tender a nature with Coligny, who, for her sake, had been killed in a duel, in the Place Royale, by the Duc de Guise. She was now connected by bonds of a political nature with the Prince de Marsillac, the eldest son of the old Duc de Rochefoucauld, whom she was trying to inspire with an enmity toward the Duc de Condé, her brother-in-law, whom she now hated mortally. D'Artagnan thought of all these matters. He remembered how at the Louvre he had often seen, as she passed by him in the full radiance of her dazzling charms, the beautiful Madame de Longueville. He thought of Aramis, who, without possessing any greater advantages than himself, had formerly been the lover of Madame de Chevreuse, who had been to a former court what Madame de Longueville was in that day. And he wondered how it was that there should be in the world people who succeed in every wish, some in ambition, others in love, whilst others, either from chance, or from ill luck, or from some natural defect or impediment, remain halfway upon the road toward fulfillment of their hopes and expectations. He was confessing to himself that he belonged to the latter unhappy class when Planchet approached and said, "I will lay a wager, your honor, that you and I are thinking of the same thing." "I doubt it, Planchet," replied D'Artagnan, "but what are you thinking of?" "I am thinking, sir, of those desperate-looking men who were drinking in the inn where we rested." "Always cautious, Planchet. 'Tis instinct, your honor." "Well, what does your instinct tell you now?" "Sir, my instinct told me that those people were assembled there for some bad purpose, and I was reflecting on what my instinct had told me in the darkest corner of the stable, when a man wrapped in a cloak and followed by two other men came in." Ah," said D'Artagnan, Planchet's recital agreeing with his own observations. "Well, one of these two men said, 'He must certainly be at Noisy or be coming there this evening, for I have seen his servant.'" "Art thou sure?" said the man in the cloak. "Yes, my prince." "My prince," interrupted D'Artagnan. "Yes, my prince, but listen. If he is here, this is what the other man said. Let's see decidedly what to do with him." "What to do with him?" answered the prince. "Yes, he's not a man to allow himself to be taken anyhow. He'll defend himself." "Well, we must try to take him alive." "Have you cords to bind him with and a gag to stop his mouth?" "We have." "Remember that he will most likely be disguised as a horseman." "Yes, yes, my lord, don't be uneasy. Besides, I shall be there." "You will assure us that justice." "Yes, yes." "I answer for all that," the prince said. "Well, then, we'll do our best." Having said that, they went out of the stable. "Well, what matters all that to us?" said D'Artagnan. "This is one of those attempts that happen every day. Are you sure that we are not its objects?" "We." "Why? Just remember what they said." "I have seen his servant," said one, "and that applies very well to me." "Well, he must certainly be at Noisy or be coming there this evening," said the other, "and that applies very well to you." "What else?" Then the prince said, "Take notice that in all probability he will be disguised as a cavalier, which seems to me to leave no room for doubt, since you are dressed as a cavalier and not as an officer of musketeers." "Now then, what do you say to that?" "Alas!" "My dear Planchet," said D'Artagnan, sighing, "we are unfortunately no longer in those times in which princes would care to assassinate me. Those were good old days, never fear. These people owe us no grudge." "Is your honor sure?" "I can answer for it they do not." "Well, we won't speak of it any more, then." And Planchet took his place in D'Artagnan's suite with that sublime confidence he had always had in his master, which even 15 years of separation had not destroyed. They had traveled onward about half a mile, when Planchet came close up to D'Artagnan. "Stop, sir, look yonder," he whispered. "Don't you see in the darkness something pass by like shadows?" "I fancy I hear horses' feet." "Impossible," returned D'Artagnan. "The ground is soaking wet, yet I fancy, as thou sayest, that I see something." At this moment the neighing of a horse struck his ear, coming through darkness and space. "There are men somewhere about, but that's of no consequence to us," said D'Artagnan. "Let us ride onward." At about 8:30 they reached the first houses in Noisy. Everyone was in bed, and not a light was to be seen in the village. The obscurity was broken only now, and then, by the still darker lines of the roofs of houses. Here and there, a dog barked behind a door, or an affrighted cat fled precipitately from the midst of the pavement to take refuge behind a pile of faggots, from which retreat her eyes would shine like peridores. These were the only living creatures that seemed to inhabit the village. Toward the middle of the town, commanding the principal open space, rose a dark mass, separated from the rest of the world by 2 lanes and overshadowed in the front by enormous lime trees. D'Artagnan looked attentively at the building. "This," he said to Planchet, "must be the Archbishop's chateau, the abode of the fair Madame de Longueville, but the convent, where is that?" "The convent, your honor, is at the other end of the village. I know it well." "Well, then, Planchet, gallop up to it whilst I tighten my horse's girth, and come back and tell me if there is a light in any of the Jesuits' windows." In about 5 minutes Planchet returned. "Sir," he said, "there is one window of the convent lighted up." "Hem." "If I were a frondeur," said D'Artagnan, "I should knock here and should be sure of a good supper." "If I were a monk I should knock yonder and should have a good supper there, too. Whereas, 'tis very possible that between the castle and the convent we shall sleep on hard beds, dying with hunger and thirst." "Yes," added Planchet, "like the famous ass of Baradan." "Shall I knock?" "Hush," replied D'Artagnan, "the light no longer burns in yonder window." "Do you hear nothing?" whispered Planchet. "What is that noise?" There came a sound like a whirlwind. At the same time 2 troops of horsemen, each composed of 10 men, sallied forth from each of the lanes which encompassed the house and surrounded D'Artagnan and Planchet. "Heyday!" cried D'Artagnan, drawing his sword and taking refuge behind his horse. "Are you not mistaken? Is it really for us that you mean your attack? Here he is." "We have him," cried the horsemen, rushing on D'Artagnan with naked swords. "Don't let him escape," said a loud voice. "No, my lord, be assured we shall not." D'Artagnan thought it was now time for him to join in the conversation. "Halloo, gentlemen," he called out in his Gascon accent. "What do you want?" "What do you demand?" "That thou shalt soon know," shouted a chorus of horsemen. "Stop, stop," cried he whom they had addressed as my lord. "'Tis not his voice." "Ah, just so, gentlemen. Pray, do people get into a passion at random at Noisy? Take care, for I warn you that the first man that comes within the length of my sword, and my sword is long, I rip him up." The chieftain of the party drew near. "What are you doing here?" he asked in a lofty tone, as that of one accustomed to command. "And you, what are you doing here?" replied D'Artagnan. "Be civil, or I shall beat you, for although one may not choose to proclaim oneself, one insists on respect suitable to one's rank. You don't choose to discover yourself, because you are the leader of an ambuscade," returned D'Artagnan. "But with regard to myself, who am traveling quietly with my own servant, I have not the same reasons as you have to conceal my name." "Enough." "Enough. What is your name?" "I shall tell you my name in order that you may know where to find me, my lord, or my prince, as it may suit you best to be called," said our Gascon, who did not choose to seem to yield to a threat. "Do you know Monsieur d'Artagnan, lieutenant in the King's Musketeers?" said the voice. "You are Monsieur d'Artagnan." "I am." "Then you came here to defend him." "Him." "Whom?" "The man we are seeking." "It seems," said D'Artagnan, "that whilst I thought I was coming to Noisy, I have entered, without suspecting it, into the kingdom of mysteries." "Come," replied the same lofty tone, "answer." "Are you waiting for him, underneath these windows?" "Did you come to Noisy to defend him?" "I am waiting for no one," replied D'Artagnan, who was beginning to be angry. "I propose to defend no one but myself, and I shall defend myself vigorously, I give you warning." "Very well," said the voice. "Go away from here and leave the place to us." "Go away from here," said D'Artagnan, whose purposes were in conflict with that order. "That is not so easy, since I am on the point of falling, and my horse, too, through fatigue, unless, indeed, you are disposed to offer me a supper and a bed in the neighborhood." "Rascal! Eh?" "Monsieur," said D'Artagnan, "I beg you will have a care what you say, for if you utter another word like that, be you marquis, duke, prince, or king, I will thrust it down your throat." "Do you hear?" "Well, well," rejoined the leader, "there's no doubt 'tis a Gascon who is speaking, and therefore not the man we are looking for. Our blow has failed for tonight. Let us withdraw." "We shall meet again, Master D'Artagnan," continued the leader, raising his voice. "Yes, but never with the same advantages," said D'Artagnan, in a tone of raillery. "For when you meet me again, you will perhaps be alone, and there will be daylight." very good," said the voice. "En route, gentlemen." And the troop, grumbling angrily, disappeared in the darkness and took the road to Paris. D'Artagnan and Planchet remained for some moments still on the defensive. Then, as the noise of the horsemen became more and more distant, they sheathed their swords. "Thou seest, simpleton," said D'Artagnan to his servant, "that they wished no harm to us. But to whom, then? I'faith, I neither know nor care. What I do care for now is to make my way into the Jesuits' convent, so to horse and let us knock at their door. Happen what will, the devil take them, they can't eat us." And he mounted his horse. Planchet had just done the same when an unexpected weight fell upon the back of the horse, which sank down. "Hey!" "Your honor," cried Planchet, "I've a man behind me." D'Artagnan turned around and plainly saw two human forms on Planchet's horse. "'Tis then the devil that pursues," he cried, drawing his sword and preparing to attack the new foe. "No, no, dear D'Artagnan," said the figure. "'Tis not the devil, 'tis Aramis. Gallop fast, Planchet, and when you come to the end of the village, turn swiftly to the left." And Planchet, with Aramis behind him, set off at full gallop, followed by D'Artagnan, who began to think he was in the merry maze of some fantastic dream. Chapter 9. The Abbé de Herblay. At the extremity of the village, Planchet turned to the left in obedience to the orders of Aramis, and stopped underneath the window which had light in it. Aramis alighted and clapped his hands 3 times. Immediately, the window was opened, and a ladder of rope was let down from it. "My friend," said Aramis, "if you like to ascend, I shall be delighted to receive you." "Ah," said D'Artagnan, "is that the way you return to your apartment?" "After 9 at night, pardieu," said Aramis. "The rule of the convent is very severe." "Pardon me, my dear friend," said D'Artagnan. "I think you said pardieu." "Do you think so?" said Aramis, smiling. "It is possible." "You have no idea, my dear fellow, how one acquires bad habits in these cursed convents, or what evil ways all these men of the church have, with whom I am obliged to live. But will you not go up? Pass on before me, I beg of you. As the late cardinal used to say to the late king, only to show you the way, sire." And Aramis ascended the ladder quickly and reached the window in an instant. D'Artagnan followed, but less nimbly, showing plainly that this mode of ascent was not one to which he was accustomed. "I beg your pardon," said Aramis, noticing his awkwardness. "If I had known that I was to have the honor of your visit, I should have procured the gardener's ladder. But for me alone, this is good enough." "Sir," said Planchet, when he saw D'Artagnan on the summit of the ladder, "this way is easy for Monsieur Aramis and even for you. In case of necessity, I might also climb up, but my 2 horses cannot mount the ladder." "Take them to yonder shed, my friend," said Aramis, pointing to a low building on the plain. "There you will find hay and straw for them. Then come back here and clap your hands 3 times, and we will give you wine and food. Marry, forsooth, people don't die of hunger here." and Aramis, drawing in the ladder, closed the window. D'Artagnan then looked around attentively. Never was there an apartment at the same time more warlike and more elegant. At each corner were arranged trophies, presenting to view swords of all sorts, and on the walls hung 4 great pictures representing in their ordinary military costume the Cardinal de Lorraine, the Cardinal de Richelieu, the Cardinal de la Valette, and the Archbishop of Bordeaux. Exteriorly, nothing in the room showed that it was the habitation of an abbé. The hangings were of damask, the carpets from Alençon, and the bed, especially, had more the look of a fine lady's couch, with its trimmings of fine lace and its embroidered counterpane, than that of a man who had made a vow that he would endeavor to gain heaven by fasting and mortification. "You are examining my den," said Aramis. "Ah, my dear fellow, excuse me. I am lodged like a chartreux." "But what are you looking for?" "I am looking for the person who let down the ladder." "I see no one, and yet the ladder didn't come down of itself." "No, it is Bazin." "Ah." "Ah," said D'Artagnan. "But," continued Aramis, "Bazin is a well-trained servant, and seeing that I was not alone, he discreetly retired." "Sit down, my dear friend, and let us talk." And Aramis pushed forward a large easy chair, in which D'Artagnan stretched himself out. "In the first place, you will sup with me, will you not?" asked Aramis. "Yes, if you really wish it," said D'Artagnan, "and even with great pleasure, I confess. The journey has given me a devil of an appetite." "Ah, my poor friend," said Aramis, "you will find meagre fare, you were not expected. Am I then threatened with the omelette of Crevecoeur?" "Oh, let us hope," said Aramis, "that with the help of God and of Bazin we shall find something better than that in the larder of the worthy Jesuit fathers. Bazin, my friend, come here." The door opened, and Bazin entered. On perceiving the musketeer, he uttered an exclamation that was almost a cry of despair. "My dear Bazin," said D'Artagnan, "I am delighted to see with what wonderful composure you can tell a lie even in church." "Sir," replied Bazin, "I have been taught by the good Jesuit fathers that it is permitted to tell a falsehood when it is told in a good cause." "So far well," said Aramis. "We are dying of hunger. Serve us up the best supper you can, and especially give us some good wine." Bazin bowed low, sighed, and left the room. "Now we are alone, dear Aramis," said D'Artagnan. "Tell me how the devil you managed to alight upon the back of Planchet's horse." "I' faith," answered Aramis, "as you see, from heaven." "From heaven," replied D'Artagnan, shaking his head. "You have no more the appearance of coming from thence than you have of going there." "My friend," said Aramis, with a look of imbecility on his face which D'Artagnan had never observed whilst he was in the Musketeers, "if I did not come from heaven, at least I was leaving paradise, which is almost the same." "Here, then, is a puzzle for the learned," observed D'Artagnan. "Until now they have never been able to agree as to the situation of paradise. Some place it on Mount Ararat, others between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. It seems that they have been looking very far away for it, while it was actually very near. Paradise is at Noisy-le-Sec, upon the site of the Archbishop's shadow. People do not go out from it by the door, but by the window. One doesn't descend here by the marble steps of a peristyle, but by the branches of a lime tree. And the angel with a flaming sword who guards this Elysium seems to have changed his celestial name of Gabriel into that of the more terrestrial one of the Prince de Marsillac." Aramis burst into a fit of laughter. "You were always a merry companion, my dear D'Artagnan," he said, "and your witty Gascon fancy has not deserted you." "Yes, there is something in what you say. Nevertheless, do not believe that it is Madame de Longueville with whom I am in love." "A plague on't." "I shall not do so. After having been so long in love with Madame de Chevreuse, You would hardly lay your heart at the feet of her mortal enemy." "Yes," replied Aramis with an absent air. "Yes, that poor Duchess. I once loved her much, and to do her justice, she was very useful to us. Eventually, she was obliged to leave France. He was a relentless enemy, that damned cardinal," continued Aramis, glancing at the portrait of the old minister. "He had even given orders to arrest her, and would have cut off her head had she not escaped with her waiting maid. Poor Kitty. I have heard that she met with a strange adventure in I don't know what village, with I don't know what curé, of whom she asked hospitality and who, having but one chamber, and taking her for a cavalier, offered to share it with her. For she had a wonderful way of dressing as a man, that dear Marie. I know only one other woman who can do it as well. So they made this song about her, La Boissière dis moi. You know it, don't you? No, sing it, please." Aramis immediately complied and sang the song in a very lively manner. "Bravo!" cried D'Artagnan. "You sing charmingly, dear Aramis. I do not perceive that singing masses has spoiled your voice." "My dear D'Artagnan," replied Aramis, "you understand, when I was a musketeer I mounted guard as seldom as I could. Now when I am an abbé I say as few masses as I can. But to return to our Duchess. Which, the Duchess de Chevreuse or the Duchess de Longueville? Have I not already told you that there is nothing between me and the Duchess de Longueville? Little flirtations, perhaps, and that's all. No, I spoke of the Duchess de Chevreuse. Did you see her after her return from Brussels after the king's death? Yes, she is still beautiful. Yes, said Aramis, I saw her also at that time. I gave her good advice, by which she did not profit. I ventured to tell her that Mazarin was the lover of Anne of Austria. She wouldn't believe me, saying that she knew Anne of Austria, who was too proud to love such a worthless coxcomb. After that she plunged into the cabal headed by the Duke of Beaufort, and the coxcomb arrested de Beaufort and banished Madame de Chevreuse. You know, resumed D'Artagnan, that she has had leave to return to France. Yes, she has come back and is going to commit some fresh folly or another. Oh, but this time perhaps she will follow your advice. Oh, this time, returned Aramis. I haven't seen her. She is much changed. In that respect, unlike you, my dear Aramis, for you are still the same. You have still your beautiful dark hair, still your elegant figure, still your feminine hands, which are admirably suited to a prelate. Yes, replied Aramis, I am extremely careful of my appearance. Do you know that I am growing old? I am nearly 37. Mind, Aramis, D'Artagnan smiled as he spoke. Since we are together again, let us agree on one point. What age shall we be in future? How? Formerly I was your junior by 2 or 3 years, and if I am not mistaken, I am turned 40 years old. Indeed. Then, tease I who am mistaken, for you have always been a good chronologist. By your reckoning, I must be 43 at least. The devil I am. Don't let it out at the Hotel Rambouillet. It would ruin me, replied the abbé. Don't be afraid, said D'Artagnan. I never go there. Why, what in the world, cried Aramis, is that animal Bazin doing? Bazin. Hurry up there, you rascal. We are mad with hunger and thirst. Bazin entered at that moment carrying a bottle in each hand. At last, said Aramis, we are ready, are we? Yes, monsieur, quite ready, said Bazin, but it took me some time to bring up all the... Because you always think you have on your shoulders your beadle's robe and spend all your time reading your breviary. But I give you warning that if in polishing your chapel utensils you forget how to brighten up my sword, I will make a great fire of your blessed images, and will see that you are roasted on it. Bazin, scandalized, made a sign of the cross with the bottle in his hand. D'Artagnan, more surprised than ever at the tone and manners of the Abbé de Herblay, which contrasted so strongly with those of the musketeer Aramis, remained staring with wide-open eyes at the face of his friend. Bazin quickly covered the table with a damask cloth and arranged upon it so many things, gilded, perfumed, appetizing, that D'Artagnan was quite overcome. "But you expected someone, then?" asked the officer. "Oh," said Aramis, "I always try to be prepared, and then I knew you were seeking me." "From whom?" "From Master Bazin, to be sure. He took you for the devil, my dear fellow, and hastened to warn me of the danger that threatened my soul if I should meet again a companion so wicked as an officer of musketeers." "Oh, monsieur," said Bazin, clasping his hands supplicatingly. "Come, no hypocrisy. You know that I don't like it. You will do much better to open the window and let down some bread, a chicken and a bottle of wine to your friend Planchet, who has been this last hour killing himself clapping his hands." Planchet, in fact, had bedded and fed his horses, and then coming back under the window had repeated 2 or 3 times the signal agreed upon. Bazin obeyed, fastened to the end of a cord the 3 articles designated, and let them down to Planchet, who then went satisfied to his shed. "Now to supper," said Aramis. The 2 friends sat down, and Aramis began to cut up fowls, partridges and hams with admirable skill. "The deuce!" cried D'Artagnan. "Do you live in this way always?" "Yes, pretty well. The coadjutor has given me dispensations from fasting on the jours maigres, on account of my health. Then I have engaged as my cook the cook who lived with Lafalone. You know the man I mean, the friend of the cardinal, and the famous epicure whose grace after dinner used to be, 'Good Lord, do me the favor to cause me to digest what I have eaten.' Nevertheless, he died of indigestion in spite of his grace," said D'Artagnan. "What can you expect?" replied Aramis in a tone of resignation. "Every man that's born must fulfill his destiny. If it be not an indelicate question," resumed D'Artagnan, "have you grown rich?" "Oh, heaven! No. I make about 12,000 francs a year, without counting a little benefice of 1,000 crowns the prince gave me." "And how do you make your 12,000 francs?" "By your poems. No, I have given up poetry, except now and then to write a drinking song, some gay sonnet or some innocent epigram. I compose sermons, my friend." "What?" "Sermons." "Do you preach them?" "No, I sell them to those of my cloth who wish to become great orators." "Ah, indeed. And you have not been tempted by the hopes of reputation yourself?" "I should, my dear D'Artagnan, have been so, but nature said no. When I am in the pulpit, if by chance a pretty woman looks at me, I look at her again. If she smiles, I smile too. Then I speak at random. Instead of preaching about the torments of hell, I talk of the joys of paradise." An event took place in the church of St. Louis O'Marais. A gentleman laughed in my face. I stopped short to tell him that he was a fool. The congregation went out to get stones to stone me with, but whilst they were away, I found means to conciliate the priests who were present, so that my foe was pelted instead of me. 'Tis true that he came the next morning to my house, thinking that he had to do with an abbé, like all other abbés. And what was the end of the affair? We met in the Place Royale, egad. You know about it. Was I not your second? Cried D'Artagnan. You were, you know how I settled the matter. Did he die? I don't know. But, at all events, I gave him absolution in articulo mortis. 'Tis enough to kill the body, without killing the soul. Bazin made a despairing sign, which meant that while perhaps he approved the moral, he altogether disapproved the tone in which it was uttered. "Bazin, my friend," said Aramis, "you don't seem to be aware that I can see you in that mirror, and you forget that once for all I have forbidden all signs of approbation or disapprobation. You will do me the favor to bring us some Spanish wine, and then to withdraw. Besides, my friend D'Artagnan has something to say to me privately. Have you not, D'Artagnan?" D'Artagnan nodded his head, and Bazin retired, after placing on the table the Spanish wine. The two friends, left alone, remained silent, face to face. Aramis seemed to await a comfortable digestion, D'Artagnan to be preparing his exordium. Each of them, when the other was not looking, hazarded a sly glance. It was Aramis who broke the silence. "What are you thinking of, D'Artagnan?" he began. "I was thinking, my dear old friend, that when you were a musketeer you turned your thoughts incessantly to the church, and now that you are an abbé you are perpetually longing to be once more a musketeer." "'Tis true. Man, as you know," said Aramis, "is a strange animal made up of contradictions. Since I became an abbé, I dream of nothing but battles. That is apparent in your surroundings. You have rapiers here of every form and to suit the most exacting taste. Do you still fence well? I fence as well as you did in the old time, better still, perhaps. I do nothing else all day. And with whom? With an excellent master-at-arms that we have here." "What?" "Here. Yes, here in this convent, my dear fellow." "There is everything in a Jesuit convent. Then you would have killed Monsieur de Marsillac if he had come alone to attack you instead of at the head of 20 men. "Undoubtedly," said Aramis, "and even at the head of his 20 men if I could have drawn without being recognized." "God pardon me," said D'Artagnan to himself, "I believe he has become more Gascon than I am." Then aloud, "Well, my dear Aramis, do you ask me why I came to seek you?" "No, I have not asked you that," said Aramis, with his subtle manner, "but I have expected you to tell me. Well, I sought you for the single purpose of offering you a chance to kill Monsieur de Marsillac whenever you please, prince though he is. Hold on." "Wait," said Aramis, "that is an idea, of which I invite you to take advantage, my friend. Let us see. With your 1,000 crowns from the abbey and the 12,000 francs you make by selling sermons, are you rich?" "Answer frankly." "I am as poor as Job, and were you to search my pockets and my boxes, I don't believe you would find 100 pistoles." "Peste! 100 pistoles!" said D'Artagnan to himself. "He calls that being as poor as Job. If I had them, I should think myself as rich as Croesus." Then aloud, "Are you ambitious?" "As Enceladus." "Well, my friend, I bring you the means of becoming rich, powerful, and free to do whatever you wish." The shadow of a cloud passed over Aramis's face as quickly as that which in August passes over the field of grain, but quick as it was, it did not escape D'Artagnan's observation. "Speak on," said Aramis. "One question first. Do you take any interest in politics?" A gleam of light shone in Aramis's eyes, as brief as the shadow that had passed over his face, but not so brief but that it was seen by D'Artagnan. "No," Aramis replied. "Then proposals from any quarter will be agreeable to you, since for the moment you have no master but God. It is possible. Have you, my dear Aramis, thought sometimes of those happy days of youth we passed laughing, drinking, and fighting each other for play?" "Certainly, and more than once regretted them. It was indeed a glorious time." "Well, those splendidly wild days may chance to come again. I am commissioned to find out my companions, and I began by you, who were the very soul of our society." Aramis bowed, rather with respect than pleasure at the compliment. "To meddle in politics," he exclaimed, in a languid voice, leaning back in his easy chair. "Ah, dear D'Artagnan, see how regularly I live, and how easy I am here. We have experienced the ingratitude of the great, as you well know." "'Tis true," replied D'Artagnan. Yet the great sometimes repent of their ingratitude. In that case, it would be quite another thing. Come, let's be merciful to every sinner. Besides, you are right in another respect, which is in thinking that if we were to meddle in politics, there could not be a better time than the present. How can you know that? You who never interest yourself in politics. Ah, without caring about them myself, I live among those who are much occupied in them. Poet as I am intimate with Sarrazin, who is devoted to the Prince de Conti, and with Monsieur de Bois-Robert, who, since the death of Cardinal Richelieu, is of all parties or any party, so that political discussions have not altogether been uninteresting to me. I have no doubt of it, said D'Artagnan. Now, my dear friend, look upon all I tell you as merely the statement of a monk, of a man who resembles an echo, repeating simply what he hears. I understand that Mazarin is at this very moment extremely uneasy as to the state of affairs, that his orders are not respected like those of our former bugbear, the deceased cardinal, whose portrait as you see hangs yonder. For whatever may be thought of him, it must be allowed that Richelieu was great. I will not contradict you there, said D'Artagnan. My first impressions were favorable to the minister. I said to myself that a minister is never loved, but that with the genius, this one was said to have he would eventually triumph over his enemies and would make himself feared, which in my opinion is much more to be desired than to be loved. D'Artagnan made a sign with his head, which indicated that he entirely approved that doubtful maxim. This, then, continued Aramis, was my first opinion, but as I am very ignorant in matters of this kind, and as the humility which I profess obliges me not to rest on my own judgment, but to ask the opinion of others, I have inquired. My friend, Aramis paused. Well, what? Asked his friend. Well, I must mortify myself. I must confess that I was mistaken. Monsieur de Mazarin is not a man of genius. As I thought, he is a man of no origin. Once a servant of Cardinal Bentivoglio, and he got on by intrigue. He is an upstart, a man of no name, who will only be the tool of a party in France. He will amass wealth. He will injure the king's revenue and pay to himself the pensions which Richelieu paid to others. He is neither a gentleman in manner nor in feeling, but a sort of buffoon, a punchinello, a pantaloon. Do you know him? I do not. Hem, said D'Artagnan, there is some truth in what you say. Ah. It fills me with pride to find that, thanks to a common sort of penetration with which I am endowed, I am approved by a man like you, fresh from the court. But you speak of him, not of his party, his resources. It is true, the queen is for him, something in his favor, but he will never have the king. A mere child. A child who will be of age in 4 years. Then he has neither the parliament nor the people with him. They represent the wealth of the country, nor the nobles nor the princes, who are the military power of France. D'Artagnan scratched his ear. He was forced to confess to himself that this reasoning was not only comprehensive, but just. You see, my poor friend, that I am sometimes bereft of my ordinary thoughtfulness. Perhaps I am wrong in speaking thus to you, who have evidently a leaning to Mazarin. I, cried D'Artagnan, not in the least. You spoke of a mission. Did I? I was wrong then. No, I said what you say. There is a crisis at hand. Well, let's fly the feather before the wind. Let us join with that side to which the wind will carry it and resume our adventurous life. We were once 4 valiant knights, 4 hearts fondly united. Let us unite again, not our hearts, which have never been severed, but our courage and our fortunes. Here's a good opportunity for getting something better than a diamond. You are right, D'Artagnan. I held a similar project, But as I had not nor ever shall have your fruitful, vigorous imagination, the idea was suggested to me. Everyone nowadays wants auxiliaries. Propositions have been made to me, and I confess to you frankly that the coadjutor has made me speak out. Monsieur de Gondi. The cardinal's enemy. No, the king's friend, said Aramis. The king's friend, you understand. Well, it is a question of serving the king, the gentleman's duty. But the king is with Mazarin. He is, but not willingly, in appearance, not heart, and that is exactly the snare the king's enemies are preparing for the poor child. Ah! But this is, indeed, civil war which you propose to me, dear Aramis. War for the king. Yet the king will be at the head of the army on Mazarin's side. But his heart will be in the army commanded by the Duc de Beaufort. Monsieur de Beaufort. He is at Vincennes. Did I say Monsieur de Beaufort? Monsieur de Beaufort, or another. Monsieur de Beaufort or Monsieur le Prince. But Monsieur le Prince is to set out for the army. He is entirely devoted to the cardinal. Oh, said Aramis, there are questions between them at this very moment. And besides, if it is not the prince, then Monsieur de Gondi. But Monsieur de Gondi is to be made a cardinal. They are soliciting the hat for him. And are there no cardinals that can fight? Come now, recall the 4 cardinals that at the head of armies have equaled Monsieur de Guebriant and Monsieur de Gassion. But a humpbacked general. Under the cuirass, the hump will not be seen. Besides, remember that Alexander was lame and Hannibal had but one eye. Do you see any great advantage in adhering to this party? Asked D'Artagnan. I foresee in it the aid of powerful princes, with the enmity of the government, counteracted by parliament and insurrections. That may be done if they can separate the king from his mother. That may be done, said Aramis. Never, cried D'Artagnan. You, Aramis, know Anne of Austria better than I do. Do you think she will ever forget that her son is her safeguard, her shield, the pledge for her dignity, for her fortune and her life? Should she forsake Mazarin, she must join her son and go over to the prince's side. But you know better than I do that there are certain reasons why she can never abandon Mazarin. Perhaps you are right, said Aramis thoughtfully. Therefore I shall not pledge myself. To them or to us, do you mean, Aramis? To no one. I am a priest, resumed Aramis. What have I to do with politics? I am not obliged to read any breviary. I have a jolly little circle of witty abbés and pretty women. Everything goes on smoothly, so certainly, dear friend, I shall not meddle in politics. Well, listen, my dear Aramis, said D'Artagnan. Your philosophy convinces me on my honor. I don't know what devil of an insect stung me and made me ambitious. I have a post by which I live. At the death of Monsieur de Tréville, who is old, I may be a captain, which is a very snug berth for a once penniless Gascon. Instead of running after adventures, I shall accept an invitation from Porthos. I shall go and shoot on his estate. You know he has estates, Porthos. I should think so indeed. 10 leagues of wood, of marsh, land, and valleys. He is lord of the hill and the plain, and is now carrying on a suit for his feudal rights against the Bishop of Noyon. Good, said D'Artagnan to himself. That's what I wanted to know. Porthos is in Picardy, then aloud, and he has taken his ancient name of Valin, to which he adds that of Bracia, an estate which has been a barony by my troth, so that Porthos will be a baron. I don't doubt it. The Baroness Porthos will sound particularly charming. And the 2 friends began to laugh. So, D'Artagnan resumed, you will not become a partisan of Mazarin S., nor you of the Prince de Condé. No, let us belong to no party, but remain friends. Let us be neither cardinalists nor Frondists. Adieu, then. And D'Artagnan poured out a glass of wine. To old times, he said. Yes, returned Aramis. Unhappily, those times are past. Nonsense. They will return, said D'Artagnan. At all events, if you want me, remember the Rue Tiquetonne, Hôtel de la Chevrette. And I shall be at the convent of Jesuits, from 6 in the morning to 8 at night come by the door. From 8 in the evening until 6 in the morning come in by the window. Adieu, dear friend. Oh, I can't let you go so. I will go with you, and he took his sword and cloak. He wants to be sure that I go away, said D'Artagnan to himself. Aramis whistled for Bazin, but Bazin was asleep in the antechamber, and Aramis was obliged to shake him by the ear to awake him. Bazin stretched his arms, rubbed his eyes, and tried to go to sleep again. Come, come, sleepy-head, quick the ladder. But, said Bazin, yawning portentously, the ladder is still at the window. The other one the gardener S. Didn't you see that Monsieur D'Artagnan mounted with difficulty? It will be even more difficult to descend. D'Artagnan was about to assure Aramis that he could descend easily, when an idea came into his head which silenced him. Bazin uttered a profound sigh and went out to look for the ladder. Presently, a good, solid wooden ladder was placed against the window. Now then, said D'Artagnan, this is something like, this is a means of communication. A woman could go up a ladder like that. Aramis's searching look seemed to seek his friend's thought even at the bottom of his heart, but D'Artagnan sustained the inquisition with an air of admirable simplicity. Besides, at that moment he put his foot on the first step of the ladder and began his descent. In a moment, he was on the ground. Bazin remained at the window. Stay there, said Aramis. I shall return immediately. The two friends went toward the shed. At their approach, Planchet came out leading the two horses. That is good to see, said Aramis. There is a servant active and vigilant, not like that lazy fellow Bazin, who is no longer good for anything since he became connected with the church. Follow us, Planchet. We shall continue our conversation to the end of the village. They traversed the width of the village, talking of indifferent things, then as they reached the last houses. Go, then, dear friend, said Aramis. Follow your own career. Fortune lavishes her smiles upon you. Do not let her flee from your embrace. As for me, I remain in my humility and indolence. Adieu, thus 'tis quite decided, said D'Artagnan, that what I have to offer to you does not tempt you. On the contrary, it would tempt me were I any other man, rejoined Aramis. But I repeat, I am made up of contradictions. What I hate today I adore tomorrow, and vice versa. You see that I cannot, like you, for instance, settle on any fixed plan. Thou least, subtile one, said D'Artagnan to himself. Thou alone, on the contrary, knowest how to choose thy object and to gain it stealthily. The friends embraced. They descended into the plain by the ladder. Planchet met them hard by the shed. D'Artagnan jumped into the saddle. Then the old companions in arms again shook hands. D'Artagnan and Planchet spurred their steeds and took the road to Paris. But after he had gone about 200 steps, D'Artagnan stopped short, alighted, threw the bridle of his horse over the arm of Planchet, and took the pistols from his saddle-bow to fasten them to his girdle. "What's the matter?" asked Planchet. "This is the matter. Be he ever so cunning, he shall never say I was his dupe. Stand here, don't stir, turn your back to the road and wait for me." Having thus spoken, D'Artagnan cleared the ditch by the roadside and crossed the plain so as to wind around the village. He had observed between the house that Madame de Longueville inhabited and the convent of the Jesuits, an open space surrounded by a hedge. The moon had now risen, and he could see well enough to retrace his road. He reached the hedge and hid himself behind it. In passing by the house where the scene which we have related took place, he remarked that the window was again lighted up, and he was convinced that Aramis had not yet returned to his own apartment, and that when he did it would not be alone. In truth, in a few minutes he heard steps approaching and low whispers. Close to the hedge, the steps stopped. D'Artagnan knelt, down near the thickest part of the hedge. Two men, to the astonishment of D'Artagnan, appeared shortly. Soon, however, his surprise vanished, for he heard the murmurs of a soft, harmonious voice. One of these two men was a woman disguised as a cavalier. "Calm yourself, dear René," said the soft voice. "The same thing will never happen again. I have discovered a sort of subterranean passage which runs beneath the street, and we shall only have to raise one of the marble slabs before the door to open you an entrance and an outlet." "Oh!" answered another voice, which D'Artagnan instantly recognized as that of Aramis. "I swear to you, Princess, that if your reputation did not depend on precautions, and if my life alone were jeopardized—" "Yes, yes. I know you are as brave and venturesome as any man in the world, but you do not belong to me alone. You belong to all our party. Be prudent. Sensible. I always obey, madame, when I am commanded by so gentle a voice." He kissed her hand tenderly. "Ah!" exclaimed the cavalier with a soft voice. "What's the matter?" asked Aramis. "Do you not see that the wind has blown off my hat?" Aramis rushed after the fugitive hat. D'Artagnan took advantage of the circumstance to find a place in the hedge not so thick, where his glance could penetrate to the supposed cavalier. At that instant, the moon, inquisitive, perhaps, like D'Artagnan, came from behind a cloud, and by her light D'Artagnan recognized the large blue eyes, the golden hair, and the classic head of the Duchesse de Longueville. Aramis returned, laughing, one hat on his head and the other in his hand, and he and his companion resumed their walk toward the convent. "Good," said D'Artagnan, rising and brushing his knees. "Now I have thee. Thou art a Frondeur and the lover of Madame de Longueville." Chapter 10. Monsieur Porthos, du Vallon de Bracia de Pierrefonds. Thanks to what Aramis had told him, D'Artagnan, who knew already that Porthos called himself du Vallon, was now aware that he styled himself, from his estate, de Bracia, and that he was, on account of this estate, engaged in a lawsuit with the Bishop of Noyon. It was, then, in the neighborhood of Noyon that he must seek that estate. His itinerary was promptly determined. He would go to Dammartin, from which place two roads diverge, one toward Soissons, the other toward Campigny. There he would inquire concerning the Bracia estate and go to the right or to the left according to the information obtained. Planchet, who was still a little concerned for his safety after his recent escapade, declared that he would follow D'Artagnan even to the end of the world, either by the road to the right or by that to the left. Only he begged his former master to set out in the evening, for greater security to himself. D'Artagnan suggested that he should send word to his wife, so that she might not be anxious about him, but Planchet replied with much sagacity that he was very sure his wife would not die of anxiety through not knowing where he was, while he, Planchet, remembering her incontinence of tongue, would die of anxiety if she did know. This reasoning seemed to D'Artagnan so satisfactory that he no further insisted, and about 8 o'clock in the evening, the time when the vapors of night begin to thicken in the streets, he left the Hôtel de la Chevrette, and followed by Planchet set forth from the capital by way of the Saint Denis Gate. At midnight the two travelers were at Dammartin, but it was then too late to make inquiries. The host of the Cygne de la Croix had gone to bed. The next morning D'Artagnan summoned the host, one of those sly Normans who say neither yes nor no and fear to commit themselves by giving a direct answer. D'Artagnan, however, gathered from his equivocal replies that the road to the right was the one he ought to take, and on that uncertain information he resumed his journey. At 9 in the morning, he reached Nanteuil and stopped for breakfast. His host here was a good fellow from Picardy, who gave him all the information he needed. The Bracia estate was a few leagues from Villers-Cotterets. D'Artagnan was acquainted with Villers-Cotterets, having gone thither with the court on several occasions, for at that time Villers-Cotterets was a royal residence. He therefore shaped his course toward that place and dismounted at the Dauphin door. There he ascertained that the Bracia estate was 4 leagues distant, but that Porthos was not at Bracia. Porthos had, in fact, been involved in a dispute with the Bishop of Noyon in regard to the Pierrefonds' property, which adjoined his own, and weary at length of a legal controversy which was beyond his comprehension, he put an end to it by purchasing Pierrefonds and added that name to his others. He now called himself Du Vallon de Bracia de Pierrefonds and resided on his new estate. The travelers were therefore obliged to stay at the hotel until the next day. The horses had done 10 leagues that day and needed rest. It is true they might have taken others, but there was a great forest to pass through, and Planchet, as we have seen, had no liking for forests after dark. There was another thing that Planchet had no liking for, and that was starting on a journey with a hungry stomach. Accordingly, D'Artagnan, on awaking, found his breakfast waiting for him. It need not be said that Planchet, in resuming his former functions, resumed also his former humility, and was not ashamed to make his breakfast on what was left by D'Artagnan. It was nearly 8 o'clock when they set out again. Their course was clearly defined. They were to follow the road toward Campigny, and on emerging from the forest turn to the right. The morning was beautiful, and in this early springtime the birds sang on the trees, and the sunbeams shone through the misty glades, like curtains of golden gauze. In other parts of the forest the light could scarcely penetrate through the foliage, and the stems of 2 old oak trees, the refuge of the squirrel, startled by the travelers, were in deep shadow. There came up from all nature in the dawn of day a perfume of herbs, flowers, and leaves, which delighted the heart. D'Artagnan, sick of the closeness of Paris, thought that when a man had 3 names of his different estates joined one to another, he ought to be very happy in such a paradise. Then he shook his head, saying, "If I were Porthos and D'Artagnan came to make me such a proposition as I am going to make to him, I know what I should say to it." As to Planchet, he thought of little or nothing, but was happy as a hunting hound in his old master's company. At the extremity of the wood, D'Artagnan perceived the road that had been described to him, and at the end of the road he saw the towers of an immense feudal castle. "Oh, he said, "I fancied this castle belonged to the ancient branch of Orleans. Can Porthos have negotiated for it with the Duc de Longueville?" "Faith," exclaimed Planchet, "here's land in good condition. If it belongs to Monsieur Porthos, I wish him joy." "Zounds," cried D'Artagnan, "don't call him Porthos, nor even Vallon, call him de Bracia or de Pierrefonds. Thou wilt knell out damnation to my mission otherwise." As he approached the castle which had first attracted his eye, D'Artagnan was convinced that it could not be there that his friend dwelt. The towers, though solid and as if built yesterday, were open and broken. One might have fancied that some giant had cleaved them with blows from a hatchet. On arriving at the extremity of the castle, D'Artagnan found himself overlooking a beautiful valley, in which, at the foot of a charming little lake, stood several scattered houses, which, humble in their aspect, and covered, some with tiles, others with thatch, seemed to acknowledge as their sovereign lord a pretty chateau, built about the beginning of the reign of Henry IV, and surmounted by 4 stately, gilded weathercocks. D'Artagnan no longer doubted that this was Porthos's pleasant dwelling place. The road led straight up to the chateau which, compared to its ancestor on the hill, was exactly what a fop of the coterie of the Duc d'Enghien would have been beside a knight in steel armor in the time of Charles VII. D'Artagnan spurred his horse on and pursued his road, followed by Planchet at the same pace. In 10 minutes, D'Artagnan reached the end of an alley regularly planted with fine poplars and terminating in an iron gate, the points and crossed bars of which were gilt. In the midst of this avenue was a nobleman, dressed in green and with as much gilding about him as the iron gate, riding on a tall horse. On his right hand and his left were 2 footmen, with the seams of their dresses laced. A considerable number of clowns were assembled and rendered homage to their lord. "Ah," said D'Artagnan to himself, "can this be the Seigneur du Vallon de Bracia de Pierrefonds? Well-a-day. How he has shrunk since he gave up the name of Porthos. This cannot be Monsieur Porthos," observed Planchet, replying, as it were, to his master's thoughts. "Monsieur Porthos was 6 feet high. This man is scarcely 5. Nevertheless," said D'Artagnan, "the people are bowing very low to this person." As he spoke, he rode toward the tall horse, to the man of importance and his valets. As he approached, he seemed to recognize the features of this individual. "Jesu!" cried Planchet. "Can it be?" At this exclamation, the man on horseback turned slowly and with a lofty air, and the 2 travelers could see, displayed in all their brilliancy, the large eyes, the vermilion visage, and the eloquent smile of Mousqueton. It was indeed Mousqueton, as fat as a pig, rolling about with rude health, puffed out with good living, who, recognizing D'Artagnan and acting very differently from the hypocrite Bazin, slipped off his horse and approached the officer with his hat off, so that the homage of the assembled crowd was turned toward this new sun, which eclipsed the former luminary. "Monsieur d'Artagnan." "Monsieur d'Artagnan," cried Mousqueton, his fat cheeks swelling out and his whole frame perspiring with joy. "Monsieur d'Artagnan." "Though, what joy for my lord and master, du Vallon de Bracia de Pierrefonds. Thou good Mousqueton." "Where is thy master? You stand upon his property. But how handsome thou art, how fat. Thou hast prospered and grown stout." And D'Artagnan could not restrain his astonishment at the change good fortune had produced on the once famished one. "Hey, yes, thank God, I am pretty well," said Mousqueton. "But hast thou nothing to say to thy friend Planchet? How, my friend Planchet?" "Planchet, art thou there?" cried Mousqueton, with open arms and eyes full of tears. "My very self," replied Planchet, "but I wanted first to see if thou wert grown proud. Proud toward an old friend." "Never, Planchet." "Thou wouldst not have thought so hadst thou known Mousqueton well." "So far so well," answered Planchet, alighting and extending his arms to Mousqueton. The 2 servants embraced with an emotion which touched those who were present, and made them suppose that Planchet was a great lord in disguise. So highly did they estimate the position of Mousqueton. "And now, sir," resumed Mousqueton, when he had rid himself of Planchet, who had in vain tried to clasp his hands behind his friend's fat back, "now, sir, allow me to leave you, for I could not permit my master to hear of your arrival from any but myself. He would never forgive me for not having preceded you." "This dear friend," said D'Artagnan, carefully avoiding to utter either the former name borne by Porthos or his new one, "then he has not forgotten me." "Forgot he!" cried Mousqueton. "There's not a day, sir, that we don't expect to hear that you were made marshal either instead of Monsieur de Gascon or of Monsieur de Bassompierre." On D'Artagnan's lips there played one of those rare and melancholy smiles which seemed to emanate from the depth of his soul, the last trace of youth and happiness that had survived life's disillusions. "And you fellows," resumed Mousqueton, "stay near Monsieur le Comte d'Artagnan and pay him every attention in your power whilst I go to prepare my lord for his visit." And mounting his horse, Mousqueton rode off down the avenue on the grass at a hand gallop. "Ah, there's something promising," said D'Artagnan. "No mysteries, no cloak to hide oneself in, no cunning policy here. People laugh outright, they weep for joy here. I see nothing but faces a yard broad. In short, it seems to me that nature herself wears a holiday garb, and that the trees, instead of leaves and flowers, are covered with red and green ribbons as on gala days." "As for me," said Planchet, "I seem to smell from this place, even, a most delectable perfume of fine roast meat, and to see the scullions in a row by the hedge, hailing our approach. Ah, sir, what a cook must Monsieur Pierrefonds have, when he was so fond of eating and drinking, even whilst he was only called Monsieur Porthos." "Say no more," cried D'Artagnan. "If the reality corresponds with appearances, I am lost. For a man so well off will never change his happy condition, and I shall fail with him, as I have already done with Aramis.